If someone asked you if you were a feminist, what would you say? Would you be flummoxed? Would you say, no way? Why does the word feminism make so many people uncomfortable? That's a question I'd like to take up in my talk today. And I want to begin with a quote from the popular actor and comedian Aziz Ansari, who said, "If you believe that men and women have equal rights and someone asks you if you're a feminist, you have to say yes, because that's how words work. You can't be like, I'm a doctor who primarily does diseases of the skin. Oh, so you're a dermatologist. Oh, that's way too aggressive of a word. Not at all, not at all." Now, I think my father, a World War II veteran who passed away in '92, may have been a closet feminist. And in his own fashion, he introduced me to feminism. Let me explain. Having dropped out of high school at 17 to join the Army and the war effort, my father learned about the value of an education the hard way, by its absence. So in our household, education was of paramount importance for the 4 girls, no less than the 3 boys. And all of us, with my father and mother encouraging us, went on to earn advanced degrees. But my dad was a mechanic by trade, and when I was a little girl, he enlisted me, rather than my disinterested brother, in helping him to replace the clutch in his 1949 Dodge. It was a 2-man job. And he taught me how to play baseball. Hey, buddy, I can remember a guy calling out to us one day when we were throwing the ball around in the park. Your little girl throws just like a boy. My dad beamed. He was proud of me, and he appreciated my interest and my talents and saw no reason for me not to do whatever it was that I wanted. But the world that I grew up in, the late 50s and early 60s, was a decidedly sexist one, even though things were changing and the status quo shaken up on most all social fronts. So that by the 70s, women's rights was all the rage. And I embraced the principles of women's rights, but I had no idea really what feminism was all about until I stumbled into a women's studies classroom at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I was earning my doctorate. It was there that I learned history. Not his story and the exploits of great white men that every kid learned in the classroom, but her story that was left out of the classroom and left out of the textbooks. Women, I learned, until the mid-19th century, had been the legal property of their fathers and then of their husbands. Married women had fewer civil rights than an infant child, and a husband could beat his wife with a stick so long as it was no bigger than his thumb. She couldn't own property even if it was by inheritance hers. But most astonishingly, I learned that women weren't really included in the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal meant precisely that, all white landowning men, because the founding fathers accepted the prevailing wisdom that women lacked the capacity to reason. Women, I learned, our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers had to fight against the tyranny of a system that favored their fathers, their brothers, their husbands, and even their sons over them, and held them in very low esteem for no other reason than that they were women. But until I studied her story, I was reluctant to identify too closely with feminism, as a lot of women then and now. After all, the media portrayed feminism and feminists as something to be mocked and something to be feared. When a group of Victorian women protested in front of the White House during World War I on behalf of suffrage, the media depicted them as angry, out-of-control, man-hating bitches. Who were these bold articles picketing the White House during wartime? Feminism's answer? How can the US fight for democracy abroad while denying the most fundamental right, the right to vote, to half its population at home? When a group of women protested the Miss America beauty pageant in Atlantic City in 1968, the media painted them as bra-burning radicals. There were, in fact, no bras burned, although the 400 or so civil rights and women's rights protesters did throw girdles and other male-engineered contraptions into a trash bin to protest the devaluation and the objectification of women's bodies so aptly symbolized in the iconic beauty contest. In both protests, women were standing up for fundamental human rights, which sometimes, when attached to a woman's body, is cast in aspersion. Accordingly, feminists were man-hating radicals. Rather than, feminists were proposing the radical idea that a woman's value was equal to that of a man and shouldn't be weighed by men or measured on the basis of their appearance. So feminism got a black eye in 1917, and then another in 1968. But in spite of those public black eyes, feminism kept chugging along. After winning the right to vote in the 70s, feminism won Title IX, the Education Equity Act, sexual harassment legislation, reproductive rights, access to America's halls of higher education, a variety of professions, and the boardrooms of corporations. Now, the movement wasn't perfect. No movement is. It was spearheaded by a group of white, middle-class, educated women who couldn't see beyond the interests of, well, their own white middle class. But the gains won by feminism have benefited all women. And we see the fruits of that today in women's accomplishments and in girls' opportunities. But the 1980s and 90s saw the flagging of the movement. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. For one, there was a view that feminism had achieved all its goals, women were equal to men, and the story of feminism was over, in spite of a lot of evidence to the contrary. There was also a sense that you couldn't have one large collective movement represent the interests of all women, especially given the variations among women that occur when gender intersects with race and with class and with ethnicity. But there was also the growth of a form of social and political conservatism that persists into the present day. It fueled a widespread repudiation of feminism, feminists, and feminist gains. As a result, today, more than ever, women are judged on the basis of their appearance at great financial cost and sometimes personal risk. There's been a disturbing rollback in women's reproductive rights and violence against women in war zones, in the home, and sexual assaults in the military and on college campuses. These are major gender-related problems. But perhaps most pressingly today, many American women have to make major compromises with respect to family life if they choose to work or be professionals. Or they have to make career-ending or career-deadening choices when they choose to prioritize family life. Now, I'm happy to say that these days, more and more men are stepping up, supporting their partners and helping out in the home, which is really important because most households require 2 full-time wage earners. But the fact remains that the majority of household labor is still being done by women. And unlike their male counterparts at the office, women are laboring under a dual burden: a full-time job in the office and a full-time job at home. Damned if they do work, damned if they don't, unless, of course, they marry a wealthy man and hire a housekeeper and a nanny. Back to the future? Yes. And feminism is the naughty word? So it seems. I like to think that the tide is shifting in feminism's favor. More millennials are coming out as feminists, and they're challenging some of these misperceptions. And I think that feminism is experiencing something of a revival in the 21st century, and long after having been declared dead on the cover of Time magazine in 1998. More and more millennials and celebrities are challenging these misperceptions. So what I'm coming to understand as a result of studying women's history, tracking pop culture, and listening to students like Sarah Staley and Ian Bates in my classrooms is that feminism, more than anything else, is a media-generated perception. That perception is sometimes congruent with feminism's goals and values, but oftentimes it's not. When individuals can see past the hyped misperceptions, they're more apt to appreciate feminism's gains and identify with its aims. Let's look at some media evidence to illustrate, and I'll try to tie it into what I was saying before about millennials, and in particular millennial celebrities. When she was interviewed for Time magazine, the emerging Hollywood star Shailene Woodley was asked whether or not she was a feminist. No, she replied, with huff, one imagines, because I love men, and I think the idea of raise women to power, take men away from the power is not going to work because you need balance. Now, apart from the obvious fallacy by which she suggests that if you are a feminist, you can't love men, or if you love men, you can't be a feminist, which is obviously not true, and I'm sure unintended on her part. What Ms. Woodley fails to understand is that the fundamental basis of feminism is women's equality with men, not their supersedence over men, unless you're talking about fringe radical feminism, which we're not doing here. It is, however, about challenging a system that has for so long kept women back. But that's a finer point that Ms. Woodley fails to grasp because of the media distortion that suggests that all feminists are man-hating radicals out to supplant and disempower men. No, Ms. Woodley, feminism is about sharing power, not disempowering. Likewise, A-list actor Charlize Theron, laboring under the weight of the word feminism, seems unable to, well, see the forest for the trees. In an interview with The Vine, she proclaimed, "I don't like the word. It carries a really big weight to it that I think can rub people the wrong way. People still have an image in their heads of women burning bras, and I'm like, we've evolved a little bit, but for some reason that word has never evolved." Now, Ms. Theron, who has evolved into an accomplished actor by anyone's standards, seems to think that the misperception of the word feminism carries more weight than the reality it represents. Equality, equal rights between men and women, personal, political, social, economic. But she would have us change the word rather than challenge the misperception. I would suggest that the word doesn't need to change. People need to stop being frightened of the word because it champions women and their rights. People need to understand that standing up for women and their rights is not tantamount to rejecting men and their rights, although it does, in effect, change the balance of power. And that perhaps is the real reason guiding the misperception. But I think the tide might be shifting in feminism's favor. As I said before, I think feminism is experiencing a revival in the 21st century. More millennials are coming out as feminists, and they're challenging many of these misperceptions. For instance, wildly popular, unwilling spokesperson for her generation, the writer and star of HBO's hit series Girls, Lena Dunham, commented on feminism in an interview with The Guardian. Having been photographed with the actor Richard E. Grant, who was wearing a t-shirt that said, "This is what a feminist looks like," she was asked whether or not she was worried about branding and celebrity being the new way of doing politics. Instead of running away from the naughty word, she staked the claim, saying, "If feminism has to become a brand in order to engulf our culture and bring change, I'm not complaining." Taylor Swift became a recent convert to feminism when she learned what it was really all about. And Beyonce has identified with a form of feminism that embraces sexuality as empowerment while identifying with its social and political goals as articulated by the African author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in her aptly titled book, "We Should All Be Feminists." But no millennial has made more of a media splash than Emma Watson did in her 2014 address to the United Nations General Assembly, in which she kickstarted her He for She campaign. Having weighed the evidence and the damage of sex and gender inequality around the world, she committed to changing it. And she invited men to join the cause, saying, It's time we view gender on a spectrum and not as two opposing sets of polarities. So there's the rub and the difference. When individuals can see past the media distortions, when they can accept the uneasiness that comes with a change in the balance of power, when they become acquainted with the true nature of feminism, people are more likely to come out as feminists. As reasoned deductively by Ian Bates, a student in my recent The F Word, Feminism and Culture class, quote, "I tend to see things in a very black and white manner. Thus, to me, feminism has always been like this. Feminism is about equal rights. Equal rights is a good thing. Therefore, feminism is a good thing." What's the issue with that? Why is there so much controversy? And yes, as Ms. Watson rightly argues, men are an important part of this movement. Men who cherish freedom and equality, men who can see past their own sex, men who value their mothers, their sisters, their wives, their daughters, men who, like my father and my brothers, live, even if they do not name the cause, carry the banner of feminism as surely as I do. Now, if someone asked you if you were a feminist, what would you say? Thank you.